thanks for coming. We're here to talk with a good friend of mine, old friend of mine. We've had many a chat over many different tables. The last memorable one was in the middle of a ranch in Montana, where he was playing the ecologist and I was playing the financier, and we sort of switched roles halfway through, and it was a fun conversation. But this, I think, will be a really fun conversation because since then, John, who I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, has written a book that I think puts a lot of interesting thoughts out there about what the economic system should be, how the economic system should change, what's wrong with it, in particular in terms of living systems and nature. And these are really, really interesting ideas. Important to think about, hard to actually do. So I hope we can dig into all of that. But before we do, maybe John, if you could just give a brief introduction of how a former JPMorgan banker comes to write a book like this.
Yeah, don't not read the book just because it's written by a former banker.
Well, you had a road to Damascus conversion, right? So it's
I had a road to
the World Trade Center
9/11 conversion. It's true. So thanks for coming, first of all, and especially Woody, an old friend. Thanks for coming out tonight. One of my true earliest inspirations. I went for a walk with Woody Tash in Martha's Vineyard, and he said to me, "Food is ground zero for sustainability," which is a lesson I learned and is still true, I think. But real briefly, my story, I spent nearly 20 years on Wall Street, what I call the old JPMorgan. Not only that, I was sort of at the beginning of building the derivatives business for Morgan, Tokyo, London, New York. So I had a very cushy, fun, easy ride. Timing is a good thing to get right. And but I grew increasingly disillusioned, I guess is the way to say it. The idea of success in Wall Street terms just increasingly became not that meaningful for me. And when the merger with Chase happened, I used it as my chance to escape. Stock options all vest, off you go. I had no idea what I was going to do. But I had begun to think about aligning capital with social and environmental purpose. I had done at Morgan, believe it or not, what we now call impact investing. I had invested in a charter school company and had the same conversation about whether you can do good and do well at the same time. So frankly, I'm a bit tired of that conversation.
More things change, right, John?
Yeah, it's just, really?
Again?
And, but then it was really reading Limits to Growth that shook me to the core. This is a book written in 1972 that essentially said that the exponential growth of the material throughput of the economy on a finite planet can't continue. It's in violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Somehow that made a lot of sense to me and doesn't make much sense to a lot of people. And so I began to study with and learn with the people that understood the scale of the problem and the profound nature of the problem, and grew increasingly distressed that none of the solutions were really solutions. And so I've spent, it's turned out to be my life purpose to explore a credible, legitimate solution, even if it seems beyond our imagination that it could happen, as opposed to limiting myself to what's possible today to achieve that is clearly not a legitimate solution.
Yeah, I guess it reminds me of that famous quote. I'm going to paraphrase it because it's like, to believe that you can have infinite growth on a finite planet, you have to be either a madman or an economist.
Exactly.
Turns out we're all in that ship right now.
Exactly.
What I find interesting about regenerative economics, and you take a lot of inspiration from nature and natural systems. In fact, you say the real heart of the issue, the real heart of the problem is that we've constructed an economic and financial system that is not really designed for a living planet, that is, I would say, more mechanistic. You talk about Newtonian physics versus different forms of algorithms. Maybe you can explain that a little bit. Like, how do you see that?
Sure. So, you know, this idea of how do we create a sustainable economy is obviously not a new idea. And most of the responses to the quote problem, whether it's the ecological crises, plural, or the social crises, or now the political crises, or the financial crisis we went through and think we solved, but we haven't, or the economic crisis of despair and inequality and insecurity, whatever we want to call it, we've tried to fix those problems, but those problems are really symptoms, the way I see it. And we haven't gone to the root of the problem. And that requires digging down. I'm about to sneeze.
Go ahead. You want me to fill the dead air for you?
Yeah, if I need to. I just don't think we've been able to dig to the root effectively yet as a society. And by analogy, when Aristotle was around, there were astronomers trying to explain why the planets, when they circled the Earth, would go backwards for a while and then keep going. They never questioned whether they were circling the Earth or not, because it was obvious that they're circling the Earth, because we're standing here on the Earth and they're going around us. So they never asked about whether maybe we're not the center of the universe. They developed theories over 1,000 years to explain what I'll call the wobbles. There's a technical term for it. And I would argue that we're trapped in the same kind of disillusion or illusion about our place in the economy and our place in on the biosphere. And the illusion is created, I'm sure unintentionally, but it's because the economy is the water we swim in. We've left the design and study of economics to the economists. And the economists are not bad people and they're not stupid people, but they've built the entire intellectual framework on Newtonian physics. And the reason for that, as best I can tell, is that that's what science meant in the mid-1800s. Newton was the guy. For some reason, they didn't pay attention to the development of thermodynamics and the first and second law of thermodynamics, which is crazy.
Yeah,
because
you only take the laws you like.
Yeah. But in my research, I discovered that they literally took Newtonian physics, took the equations, and assumed, economists are good at making assumptions, that these would apply to the, quote, laws of economics. So, for example, a particle in physics became an individual in economics. And, you know, there's a big, long story behind this, but the gist of it is that from the beginning and through today, you know, you've got Ray Dalio, who's one of the most successful hedge fund managers in the history of the planet, running around with his video teaching people about how the economic machine works. So we've built our economic thinking, the design of the economy, the design of our companies, the design of our decision-making around the logic of a machine. And the simple premise of regenerative economics is that the economy is made up of human beings, which are living systems, and a collection of living systems creates a complex living system. And so we actually need to go back to literally ground zero and rethink everything as if the economy is a complex living organism. And there are many, many implications of that that are actually quite profound. Like, I'll just pick one that we talked about in the class today. You know, we make decisions based on net present value in finance. We discount the future to the present. And that makes sense in Newtonian physics, where time is just sort of a thing on the side. But in complex living systems, time is really a process of how the relationships evolve. Like, the future is different than the present because something has changed. And so, for example, a rainforest is more complex in the future than it is in the present. So it's actually more valuable in the future than it is in the present. But we treat it as wood, that if you cut it down today, it's more valuable in the present. And that's just one simple example of the mechanistic thinking that we use to make decisions in the economy. And it leads us to ideas such as the economy has externalities. But an externality it's sort of it doesn't make any sense. If you understand everything's connected to everything, there is no externalities. And so we call something like climate change or biodiversity loss or desertification an externality because we think the system is real, just like we think we're standing on Earth at the center of the universe. But the economy isn't real. What's real is life. So, the gist of this idea is that there are patterns and principles that describe how life works. And our job is not to not ruin life. It's not only to not ruin life. Of course, we don't want to breach planetary boundaries and all these other measures. But our job is to figure out how our economy can participate in life as if we're a part of life, not a part from life. And that's like profoundly different because it's like the difference between being a gardener and building a machine. Machines have parts that break down and wear out and you replace them. Living organisms have relationships that if you break them down, you die, whether it's your body or an entire economy.
Yeah, and somebody once put it to me in a very interesting way that our economy only values dead things. And obviously it's a vast generalization, but it's kind of true, right? Like if you think of your forest and tree example, we value it when it's cut and it's wood and it enters into somebody's balance sheet. We don't value everything that it brings while it's still standing. And so, I think you're right. I think the analysis of Newtonian physics, I think it goes farther back and is more ingrained in the human psyche because we were building this market and finance way before Newton, right? Like the first person whose name we know of in history was somebody whose name was written on a cuneiform tablet because he was a debtor. He owed money, right? So we had debt way back in the era of Mesopotamia. You mentioned Aristotle. Aristotle tells the tale of a philosopher who made a ton of money basically on an option on olive trees. Oh, yeah. In the time of Aristotle, right? So options existed. First recorded option that I can think of. And so we've created this financial system for a long time, and it feels like it's much more about humans' short-term thinking, right? We think that the present is more valuable than the future because there's so much uncertainty. We may not make it to the future. What's that bumper sticker? Life is uncertain, start with dessert. It feels like that's how we're thinking, right? Like if you give a kid, you go and you say, I'll give you 1 marshmallow now or 5 marshmallows in 20 minutes, 90% of kids will take the 1 marshmallow now, right? And that's what kind of the net present value says. But I agree with you. We need to move beyond that kind of evolutionarily coded way of thinking of short-termism. We live in an uncertain world. Tiger might eat me. Now is important, more important than the future. But we don't live in that world anymore, right? Like we live in a much more complex world and weird world in many ways. How do we move to that? How do we encode some of this stuff into the economic system? Do we need to get it out of discount rates, like forget discount rates?
Well, I guess the first thing I might push back a little bit. I think, there are a lot of cultures that value the long term. I mean, all of our indigenous cultures were, in a sense, reciprocal to our short-termism. And I think the U.S. is by far the worst offender of this short-termism disease.
Oh, fair enough.
But the point about the Newtonian physics and the reductionist method of decision-making is that that's when the discipline of economics took off. So it may be true, for sure. I mean, there were money lenders going back. But this thing took off in response to the invention of the discipline of neoclassical economics, and then the invention of the discipline of finance, modern finance, is no older than me. I mean, it's a very recent thing. There didn't used to be CFOs of companies. Think about that. I mean, it's a very recent.
Was the world a better place?
I think the world is a better place. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of complexity and lots of factors, but the fact that the discipline got off on this wrong foundation, and we've awarded Nobel Prizes or fake Nobel Prizes to patch it, but we've never gone down to the root of it, is to me where we need to start to think about a genuine pathway forward. Because the thing about life is that it's continued for 14 billion years in the universe. So it's got a track record. You know, it's like something we should pay attention to. So, but the difference between living systems and physics is that the complexity of living systems are not reducible to mathematical laws. And we like mathematical laws, and we like our metrics, and we like our goals. So the switch is sort of like from, it doesn't mean we shouldn't have goals and models, but it's like we have to hold them very loosely. And instead, again, what a farmer does is he or she creates conditions for life to occur in the farm. So, and by the way, Phil Jackson, the most winningest coach in NBA history, talks about creating conditions for success as opposed to dictating goals and outcomes. So to answer your question, we have to start with this mind shift from problem solving to creating conditions. Because the thing about life is that it's intelligent. So we don't have to figure it out. If we align with how life works, life will help us figure this out.
You talk in the book about rowing a canoe upstream versus downstream, right?
Like we're trying to go upstream.
Trying to go against the flow.
Yeah.
So let me push on how you get it done, right? Have you seen examples of, you mentioned indigenous people and their conceptions of nature, which, are definitely more aligned, more attuned to natural systems. Have you seen examples of sort of what approximates regenerative economics in any way out there?
Yeah. So usually we find examples. Well, let me back up. The first thing I would say is that the regenerative economy is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. It's just we don't see it because we see it through a reductionist, mechanistic lens. So, for example, the internet, where it came from, I don't know.
DARPA.
It just emerged, right? And what is it good for? It's good for circulating information. Well, that's the metabolism of information in an economy. There's nothing more profound than metabolizing information in an economy. Then we slapped extractive business models on it and have created lots of problems. But the internet itself is the regenerative economy. And no one decided to invent the regenerative economy and implement it. The internet arose organically and is a massive tool for us to use. But to answer your question more specifically, everything from an organic farm to the big scale example I generally refer to is the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain. Now, most people, well, first, quick description. So the Mondragon cooperatives emerged out of the crisis of the Spanish Civil War. So again, in response to pressure, that's good news. These things emerge in response to pressure, not because someone wrote a book.
Except this book.
And
this book will change
and had an
everything,
implementation
Tom.
plan ready to go. They emerge in response to pressure. We've got on our website at capitalinstitute.org probably 50 stories of the regenerative economy emerging, typically in pressure, in underserved communities, in difficult circumstances, including in refugee camps in Africa. But the big example that kind of puts this, into the scale of the global economy is this initiative in the Basque Country in Spain called the Mondragon Cooperatives. And most people go and study them, as I did, and they walk away and say, oh, co-ops. We need worker co-ops. The people at Mondragon would agree that worker co-ops are a good structure. But Mondragon is not about worker co-ops. It's about managing an ecosystem of businesses as a single ecosystem and managing them for the health of the whole as opposed to the health of the parts. And the way they do this, so there's, just to give you a scale, there's, I think, 80 companies, there's a university, there's a bank, and when business A has a good year, it transfers 10% of its profits to business B. And they manage it in such a way not to maximize the stock price of business A, because it's not there's no stock, but in such a way to create resiliency across the whole. And the result of that is that nobody's ever been fired. When there's a downturn over here, they find work over here, and no one's ever become a billionaire. And if you ask people, why do you do this? The mid-level and below get market compensation. The senior managers get paid less than they certainly could if they left and went into the commercial, the rest of the world. But here's what they have. They have a legacy purpose. This is about the Basque culture. And that's what you can't replicate because there's only one Basque culture. And the Basque culture has a language that's older than Latin. And so these people are building an ecosystem of healthy business to preserve their culture, and that's what they care about. And there's lots of other things they do that I would argue are aligned with all of the regenerative principles I talk about, but they didn't do it because they wanted to invent a regenerative economy. They did it because of the dignity of work. And it was started by a priest, and he said, we need to create jobs for people. So they started creating businesses and had them owned by the workers. But the workers invest in, if you get a job, you write an $18,000 check to get a job. And now you're an investor in Mondragon. And if you don't have $18,000, they'll lend it to you. And so you retire with a capital account of Mondragon. And that's your Social Security.
Right. So, I mean, playing the crass devil's advocate, you tell that story to certain people, they'll say, this is socialism. Right. This is bad and this is wrong. Right. What's your reply on something like that?
It is more socialist. Interestingly, I questioned them about that, and the guy said with a strong response, "We're capitalists," and
just not your kind of capitalist.
Yeah, and what he meant by that is we compete in the capitalist system. Right. This is not kumbaya. This is not perfect. We have to make tough decisions. It's they're in the big leagues of the global economy. But yeah, I mean, what I try to do is not get sucked into the capitalist socialist. I think it's a false choice. And frankly, Mondragon is not at all perfect from a regenerative point of view. I mean, they're trying to grow. They got all the same problems that every other business
What do they
has.
make, or what's their
business? They have a supermarket. They have a bank. They have various manufacturing businesses. The glass. They're a supplier. So they're trapped in the system. So again, they're not the poster child of the regenerative economy. The thing that makes them interesting for me is that they manage it as an ecosystem rather than as parts. And that creates opportunities across the different businesses. That is, I think, one of the secret pathways forward. So, we're actually, we have a plan to raise a fund and acquire small, mid-sized businesses and manage them as an ecosystem, as a way to implement this in the real economy.
Right. And what that does for you, so exploring the benefits, you talk about 8 principles. It'd be interesting to get a rundown of some of the main principles you think are important. But one of them is right relationship. You focus a lot on kind of like relationships in these systems. You talk about the complexity and how complexity thrives in relationships. So what you're saying here, the benefit is that you get something more complex, potentially more dynamic, more resilient, but not necessarily for each piece, but for the organism as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, we could spend an hour talking about these principles, and it would be very boring. But let's just talk about.
Okay, let's not do that.
Let's just talk about right relationship. So if you think about our economy, whether it's socialist or capitalist, how much of it is, we say it's super competitive, And super competitive ends up being, who's got the power to extract the most out of the other party in the transaction, as opposed to we're in a long-term relationship together and we genuinely want to stay in right relationship together. And so there's a short-term trade-off. Some of the greatest business deal makers would always say, leave something on the table. Make sure both parties are happy as a result of it. And then they end up building a relationship with the counterparty, and they'll do business they never dreamed of in the future because they have a trusting relationship. That happens less and less these days. And the one way I use these principles is to sort of look at what we're doing and say, well, is this in conflict with this? And, I know finance. Finance has become so much more speculative since I started in the business. It's insane. And so think about, it's sort of common sense that a speculative casino is probably not a good thing for the health of the economy, but we can't argue why unless we argue through the lens of living systems. Because the argument in the traditional sense is, well, liquid capital markets, Jamie Dimon said liquid capital markets are one of America's greatest success stories. Well, I disagree. Liquid capital markets are good, but they've become so extreme that they've become an end in themselves. And, it used to be called secondary trading, because the point of secondary trading is to facilitate the primary market, which is the capital formation market, where companies raise money to do things. But we've turned it into an end in itself. So if you think about the speculation, if we're trading with each other, and you buy IBM stock because you think it's going up, and I sell it to you because I think it's topped and it's going to go down, one of us wins. And if you have inside information, or an edge, as we call it, that I don't have, you pick me off because you know something I don't know. So there's nothing right about that relationship. We're at war. And that's what speculation in many ways boils down to, is who's got better information in order to beat the other person.
But there is a role for speculation,
As
right?
I said, yeah.
Right? I get what you're getting at. Some people call it the financialization of our system,
Yeah.
right? Where it's all about new financial products and extracting from the system rather than, building businesses, building factories, the actual, what it's supposed to be about, right? But take speculation, the creation of an option, an agricultural option. This has been created because, a farmer is planting and he's got to wait for the seeds to grow, and he's taking a risk. And he's not only taking a risk on the weather, on all kinds of things he can't control or she can't control, but they're also taking a risk on the price. And they're like, that's one risk too many. I don't want that risk. I want to shove it off to somebody else.
You're talking to a
take
derivatives
it.
guy.
I
I'm
know,
all with you.
I know, I get you. But my point is that there is that role for
Absolutely.
speculation of risk management, risk transfer. But your argument is beyond that
It's the scale.
the scale of it.
It's the balance.
It's not being used
And by the way, balance
productively.
is a principle.
Okay.
So there's nothing wrong.
So you're still going to get at the principles anyway, right?
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with speculation.
Right.
Keynes had a great saying. It was something like, it's one thing if speculation is the bubble on the back of enterprise, but it's quite another thing if enterprise becomes the bubble on the back of speculation.
Right.
And then he ends by saying the job will be ill done, meaning the capital formation job. So it's a balance issue.
And what do you think we need to do now to get this more in balance?
Well, that's just one issue. I spent a couple of years post-financial crisis arguing through a regenerative argument, a living systems argument, why this massive excess speculation was bad, and therefore why a financial transaction tax, or what it was known as a Tobin tax, would be a good, simple little tool to move things in the right direction, right? And by the way, eliminate a lot of the high-frequency trading. It would become uneconomic. And the benefit of that is not just that you have less speculative markets and less volatile markets, but that capital, both human and technological capital, moves into other areas, hopefully more productive areas than speculating. And what's happened since then is it's gone, 30x in terms of the volume of speculation.
I mean, I think that Tobin tax is interesting because it's basically a tax on financial transactions, which slows the amount of financial transactions. It's interesting because what it does, theoretically, is it introduces inefficiency in the system.
Right.
And the argument is that that's a good thing, right? That we need some of that inefficiency. I think he called it sand in the wheels of the financial system, which is, a little bit like life too, right?
Right.
Well,
adversity, it's exactly like life.
Adversity helps you.
But it is literally empirically the way life works, and so this is one of the layers of explaining the principle of dynamic balance, is the balance between efficiency and resiliency. That's been empirically shown by ecologists, and there's a famous diagram that I'll think of it. I'm having a mental block, but an ecologist studied a bunch of living systems, and mapped the data. So if you think about an upside down U that's tilted to one side, and on the x-axis is efficiency and resiliency, and the y-axis is health or sustainability, there's this window of vitality that's halfway, or that's between efficiency and resiliency. It's skewed toward resiliency, interestingly.
Yeah.
But what does economics do? It demands we pursue efficiency.
Yeah.
And so we've got a super efficient economy at the expense of resiliency, and then the pandemic happens, and the supply chains collapse, and then the financial crisis happens, and the whole financial system collapses. And so we're paying the price of this pursuit of efficiency, when in fact, if we obeyed the laws of life, we would know we need to balance the resiliency with efficiency.
Yeah. And life has a lot of redundancies as well.
That are very inefficient.
They're very inefficient.
And it keeps going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's partly going back to this question of uncertainty, right? Like that we don't know what the future holds. No matter what any modeler tells you, we don't know, right? And so how do you handle uncertainty and randomness in this world, and risk, basically, is resilience, redundancy,
Anti-fragility, if you want to use a fancy word.
Yeah. That's a wonderful concept that Nicholas Taleb came up with. His point is, for those of you who don't know this, is he says, robustness is not the opposite of fragility. Something that is fragile in uncertainty and randomness and shock will break. A teacup, you drop it, it breaks. Robust is something that in uncertainty or shock doesn't change. A rock, you drop it, it's not changed. It doesn't do anything to the rock. But there is something even beyond robustness, which he calls anti-fragility, which is a shock, uncertainty, it gets better, right? It takes it to another state. And he talks about like muscles, for instance. You shock muscles, you put them under stress, they get stronger.
Right.
And that life is like that. Evolution, highly resilient.
In the regenerative space, we call that a disturbance, like a forest fire.
Yeah.
I got exposed to this in the domain of agriculture, but not crop agriculture, but ranching, which I had no business in being involved in.
Well, neither did I. I still did too. So
But I learned about this through a practice called holistic grazing, and essentially, the idea is to use domesticated animals, cattle or sheep, and bunch them the way natural animals move in nature. Now, in nature, the reason they stay in tight herds is to protect themselves against predators. And then they keep moving on the landscape because they don't want to stand in their poop. So you have this concept of intensive grazing, fertilization, and then rest. And it's just like when we go to the gym. We eat the right food, we work out, and we disturb our muscles, and then we let them rest. And that's why there's 12 feet of soil under Iowa, is millions of years of that process has sequestered carbon to create a massive carbon sink. And in our industrial logic, our mechanistic Newtonian logic, we figured out it was more efficient to put cattle in a feedlot and grow soybeans and corn on the tall grass prairies, mow down the prairies, and turn that carbon sink into a source, and then feed the cattle the grains that makes them sick and stressed, so we then have to put antibiotics in them, blah, 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 blah. And so we've completely destroyed the relationships that naturally existed. Mm-hmm. So we've got the parts super efficient. The part of meat is cheaper. The part of milk is cheaper. And we've destroyed everything that matters in the process because we've broken the relationships.
Yeah, there's that wonderful Wendell Berry quote that the miracle of modern agriculture is that it's taken a nice solution and turned it into two problems, and essentially lack of fertilization on the
Right.
on the grains and having to deal now with the waste of millions of animals.
But just imagine if we could take that from that context, that idea, and then apply it to other contexts, including our desire to manufacture stuff. So this idea of regenerative economics isn't just about agriculture. It's grounded in agriculture. That's where most of us got exposed to it. But our challenge is to apply it across the entire economy. And that's much harder.
Okay. Hard, how does it happen? Like, what do you think, if you had to do one thing, change one thing out there in the economic system, what would you change?
Well, I've decided to concentrate on education because until we all collectively see that the Earth is not the center of the universe, the sun is, we can't have an intelligent conversation. So until we literally conceive of the economy not as a machine, but as a living organism, we're going to argue about policies and talk right past each other. And I've experienced this. I went down to Washington to argue for financial transaction tax. And the guy in the Obama administration said, yeah, but that'll make markets less efficient, and that'll be bad for growth. So Dana Meadows, I dedicated the book to Dana Meadows. She wrote an important paper called Places to Intervene in a System. And the most important place to intervene, if you want to change a system, the most important place to intervene in the system is the paradigm within which the system exists. And I've been at this for over 20 years. Woody's been at it longer than I have. And we're still trapped in the mechanistic reductionist paradigm. Mm-hmm. And we've made progress, but we've made very little real progress, I would argue.
Is there anything other than education that will really move things and change things? And then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, I don't think there's any silver bullets. I just don't. I think everything,
one big change. Give me something.
Yeah,
here, John.
I know.
Work with me here.
Yeah, everyone wants the answer.
Just one thing. I don't want the answer. I just want one little pellet in the silver buckshot.
I think this conversation affects the outcome.
Okay.
That's the physics. That's quantum entanglement says this is true. Nobel physics.
Nobel physics. Okay.
There isn't going to be a hero to save the world. Time magazine cover. There isn't going to be that. It's going to be that we first go through an inner transformation. There's a consciousness awakening that's happening. It happened with me. Anyone who is involved in this work has probably had some kind of either was born into a consciousness or has had some kind of a consciousness shift. And by the way, the guy that invented the microprocessor literally has had this shift. So it's not just, it's happening. Even with people deep in the mechanistic reductionist world.
Fast enough or not fast enough?
Not fast enough. But we're way too late when I first learned about this problem.
Right.
So we are in a collapse. We're in there's something in ecology, you know this better than I, called the adaptive cycle. The bad news is we're in the backside, the collapse phase. The good news is that the back end is quicker than the front. But we're going through something. Mark Carney called it a rupture. We should accept that's how life works. It goes through these cycles. It doesn't mean everyone's going to die. It doesn't mean that the end of the world. But I believe modernity has come to its end, and the shift we're living through, and all of us will live through and probably not see the end of, is a bigger shift than the shift from the medieval age to the modern age. Like, that's the scale of this change.
And you think it is towards that more natural living systems? You think that's the shift?
I think it has to, because the pressure is building. And, I mean, another piece of evidence, the Chinese government has put in their constitution that we will, I forget the language, but we will become an eco-civilization. That's in their constitution. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people in China scrambling to figure out what that means and how do we do it. And I actually think, and if you look at all of the very tangible things like renewable energy and batteries and stuff, they're way, way far ahead of anything going on here. So, we're kind of myopic, and countries in the emerging economies are going to leapfrog a lot of our technologies. But if we don't get the machine to living organism piece right, we will make the same mistakes over and over again. So,
Eva, you had a question?
Yeah, you kind of ended up asking a similar question, but I understand that you're saying education is the most important thing. Given the time frame of climate change, you still think it's the most important thing?
I've been around a long time.
Keep your answer or change your answer?
No, I'm going to keep it. I've been around so many conversations and heard so much BS about targets and goals, and it's not working. And I think it's because there's a much bigger shift that's going to be required. That's kind of at an inner level that we need to wake up to. And so, if I had any idea how to shift policies to take away all the subsidies to fossil fuels, make fossil fuel companies go away, and invest trillions of dollars in renewable energy, I would work on it. I don't know how to do that, but if you know how to do that, please do that.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering too is like, what is your vision for like the mechanism for getting to this interchange in so many people? Like, do we need like a social movement or like a giant ad campaign or like?
I think, first of all, I think it's happening. I don't have data on it, but I feel it. When I speak with students, they're nodding their head like this is obvious. What the hell's wrong with us? They're not saying this is crazy. If I look at my course community, there's, 2,500 people that have shown up that know this in their gut. They're just looking for someone to help them connect the dots, but they know it already. So I'm very confident it's happening. I'm also very confident it's happening too slowly. And all of us feel powerless. But believe me, like Michael Bloomberg, he's got billions of dollars. He put, I don't know, a decade of his life into climate change, and he feels powerless, right? So it's not a question of doing what we're doing better, harder, faster with more money. There's something else at it. And I honestly, it's a spiritual awakening that will cause it to happen. And those tend to happen when crises happen. They don't tend to happen when everything's wonderful. That's my opinion.
Yeah,
anyway.
no, I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
You optimistic now here?
Well, let me, just on the optimism thing, I actually remain, I don't use the word optimistic because I think it'd be naive to say, yeah, I'm optimistic, but I am hopeful. And the reason I'm hopeful is because the thinking that I'm sharing is not, it may be a new way I've expressed it, but it's been around for a long, long time. And it's aligned with our latest science from people who are literally Einstein level smart, have been attracted to this and say, yeah, this is the convergence of our latest modern Western science with our most ancient wisdom traditions from around the world. And so if those two things align, what are the chances of it not being roughly directionally correct? And the key, and here's the key to being hopeful, is that if we do this, it will manifest potential that we can't see in advance. Just like you have potential to do something with your life that you don't know today and your parents don't know today. And that is the emergent process of life, right? That is how life works. Life emerges into new forms of complexity that we can't measure in advance. So none of our goals are correct. No one had a goal that John Fullerton was going to leave banking and become a regenerative economist. No one has a goal that there's going to be a Mondragon cooperative ecosystem that's going to be the model for not just co-ops, but for managing a series of businesses as an ecosystem. No one had a goal to create the internet so we could circulate information. All these things are happening. And our problem is we're so trapped in our reductionist thinking that we think the answer is, oh, I need a better goal. And we've been trying to do the SDGs and we've gone backwards. And so what do? We say, oh, we need some more goals. So now we have the IDGs. And it's not about the goals. It's about creating the conditions.
That's not how life happens, right? Like life happens through tinkering, doing,
Yeah.
changing. It's not like directional.
So first and foremost, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and speak to us.
Sure.
My
pleasure.
Yeah, I would be curious in kind of, because I agree with you that we need paradigmatic change, but I think where I'm not quite sure. I'm either concerned about it or unconvinced by it that change is kind of an idiosyncratic process that we need to hope people go through. And I'd be curious to hear how you think about the economy and economic systems as an imagined community into which we have all been interpolated, and whether or not we could build an alternate imagined community and interpolate folks into that is regenerative in nature.
Almost sounds like a blue pill.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the conspiracy aspect.
A
of
green
this.
pill, blue pill. When you say interpolated into, tell me what you mean by that.
Sure. I think what I'm driving at is Louis Althusser's idea of interpolation or calling someone into a system. The example he gives, which I will admit is kind of a terrible example, is he says, imagine that you're walking down the street and then someone points at you and says, you. What he then says is that in that moment that you turn around, you have identified with the you and been brought into the systems, specifically a policeman is saying you have been brought into the system of policing and let yourself be identified as a you rather than a person. And so the kind of the...
Without you deciding to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the broader argument, and this is, I am layering Althusser onto imagined communities in a way that was probably not intended, but kind of the broader argument there might be the reason that you are, I'll use myself, the reason I am an American in the sense of, I know what an American is not because I was born here, but because I was socialized into and interpolated into the identity of Americanness.
Yeah.
And so what I'm basically asking is, do you think it seems plausible to argue that we have been interpolated and socialized into being economic beings, and that re-socializing people is a plausible mechanism? And if so, how would you think
So one of my
that?
favorite quotes I throw around is from Einstein, and this relates to your questions. Like the normal answer to the question is build it, show them a model. Build a regenerative company. There's lots of people doing that. There's lots of examples. Show people a model and then they'll believe it. What Einstein said is, I'm sure he wouldn't disagree with that. And Bucky Fuller said that. So that's true. But something is also true. The opposite is also true, which is Einstein said theory determines what we're able to see. So what I think he means by that is that believing is seeing, which is getting to your point. And so my hope in writing a book and in teaching courses is that it will give people a new lens to see what we all see together, but see it in a new way, see it in a revolutionary way. And in that sense, I guess I'm inviting the reinterpolation of reality through a lens which I think is more accurate than the lens we've been socialized into seeing reality. And I know the lens we're looking at reality in is wrong. The proof is, just look around us. Like, it's now been scientifically tested, and if economics was a genuine science, what's the term for it when you reject a theory that you've disproved? Yeah, we've disproved neoclassical economics, and yet we haven't, because no one says that. So I think you're onto something. I don't know how, I don't think anyone's going to figure out how to do this. I think all of us working on this shared understanding with rising pressure will feel our way clumsily to a new story. But last thought on it is there's lots of people saying we need new stories. We need films, novels, artistic expressions. Chances are it's an artist that's going to guide us, not an economist or a politician.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. In terms of moving from belief to seeing, you've been talking about these various different co-ops that are resilient by sharing capital between each other and raising a fund to invest in this. I'd be curious how you think about the extent to which this is largely extendable, or the extent to which it creates specific kind of, I guess, enclaves of economics that are unified by, in the case of the Basque Country, a specific cultural identity, and so doesn't so much build resilience into the economy, but build effectively create mini nations, mini national economies that compete with one another.
I'm not sure I followed the question. Did you?
Is it about balkanization kind of thing, like getting smaller decentralization? That's sort of what I was getting.
Where I'm going is, because this feels kind of like an asset manager role, is if we have the whole bunch of asset managers who build these various different resilient economic spheres, which does seem like a wonderful idea. My fear would be that the Blackstone sphere is going to compete with the Goldman sphere, and et cetera, and so we're not going to so much integrate the economy, but as create resilient and mutually hostile spheres of the economy.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to go on a straight line to a regenerative economy, and dealing with, there's a chapter in the book on, I call it the finance algorithm. And if you think about I describe it as the immune system of the current economic system. And what I mean by that, an immune system, actually, we think of it as what keeps us healthy, but technically what it does is it keeps the system in its current form. And in the case of the economy, it's an unhealthy form. But the finance algorithm has us in its grips, and the Blackstones and Goldmans of the world are the best at it. And so the biggest challenge I see, one of the ways we talk about moving toward a regenerative system is creating the conditions for health and removing obstacles. So, if you want to be healthy, not only do you need to go to the gym and get a good sleep and have a purpose in your life and eat well, you also have to cut out the candy all day long. And if you do all the other things right, but you're eating candy all day long, you're not going to get healthy. We somehow need to figure out how to degrade the finance algorithm, its power and its influence in so much of our decision making. And I know that's true, and I don't know how to do that, which gets me back to the education and the paradigm. If people understood that finance is in aggregate, it doesn't mean every financier is a bad guy. It doesn't mean that all financial transactions are bad. There's a lot of them that are brilliant. But in aggregate, the system is extractive to the economy, and that's not a question of good for the bankers, bad for the rest of us. That's bad for everything, because everything's connected to everything. So it gets back to the education and the paradigm.
Oh, okay. So this is not a good last question because it's very specific.
Okay, we'll have one more. We'll make up one more
Okay. My question is like you talk about there's a balance in like speculation, level of speculation. And I'm wondering if you've thought about or there's like someone who thinks about like how to find that balance and like what are some indicators, because like when you say like, oh, there's a winner, there's a loser, some people would be like, yeah, but like that's fine because it helps like bring like efficiency or how they perceive balance. Are there like metrics that people use like I don't know how like real investment is in terms of like building something physical, or I don't know, what are some like indicators that would help us like draw a line?
Sure, it's a great question. There's a paper, a couple papers on this that you can, I think you can get off my website. There has been work done to try to design indicators of regenerative vitality, and we don't have the data to actually do the work. And when we tried to do it without good data, it's sort of a garbage in, garbage out. But you know, you draw on there's a whole science which I'm not expert in called energy network flow science that measures energy network flow, and it measures metabolism. So like imagine if we could transport the science of understanding metabolism from an individual an individual living organism to an entire economy. What would we need to measure to do that? So, there's a long. I could talk along, but it's late. But the point is, the work of developing indicators, intrinsic indicators of health, that are analogous to when you go to the doctor, they measure your blood pressure, not because you care about your blood pressure, but because it's an intrinsic indicator of health. That is the work to be done. And when we have those indicators, then we're going to need the data. And when we have the data and the indicators, we can begin to model it. This is a 50-year project. And my invitation is to help get it started.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for your talk. I also wanted to know from you what you think about. You had a mention about property rights in your book, and a lot of regenerative economy relies on access to land and ability to manage land properly. And specifically, I guess in the United States, we see a lot of hoarding of the land. And how would we deal with kind of land and property management if we want to go towards regenerative path? Do we have to deal with like the pushback of lobbyism and private ownership, or do we have to like, is there like, do you see it there to be a potential?
Yeah, that's a great question. Hard question. I mean, the truth is the whole concept of private property is probably in conflict with living systems. Now, that, in a capitalist economy, in the United States, I don't go running around saying that very often. So what can we do instead? There's a chapter in the book on the commons. It's based a lot on Peter Barnes's work. And I believe that if we had so going back to something I said in your class today, the world order today was largely designed in the wake of World War II. And the context in the wake of World War II was very different than the current polycrisis context, right? And so I think if we could see that we need an institution of the commons, where whether I own the property or not, there is a shared understanding of how the commons needs to be managed for the health of the whole, we could diffuse a lot of the tension that arises out of private property. Not all of it by any means, but and Peter Barnes does it. I mean, he's been thinking about just this piece of this for 20 years and has done a wonderful job at articulating a vision. But when I talk about the commons, I'm not just talking about the natural commons, I'm talking about the technological commons, the cumulative technological development of humanity as a commons. And people have estimated, there's a table in the book, I calculated that the private wealth that we measure is 13% of our true wealth. So we're running an economy, and those numbers are wrong, but order of magnitude, we're running an economy where we're fighting over 13% when the abundance of both our historic technological development and the natural abundance that we're all born into, both of those, anyone born today is born into, but they're not only abused at no cost, but they're used for free by the clever people who are becoming fabulously wealthy, and then sold back to us. And if we understood what was happening, it would be common sense to manage these commons like we manage a healthy fishery. Oh, you want to fish here? You got to buy a permit. And guess what? We get to say how many permits we sell because we understand the fishery. Imagine if the internet was managed that way. And so the commons would, I think, diffuse the pressures of private property, but not at all solve it. And there's a whole movement of land trusts. There's a lot of techniques that are being used to try to address the private property problem, but it's a big elephant in the room for sure.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Really, really appreciate it. I wonder if you could leave us before we go with a final thought or exhortation or whatever you want.
Yeah. So I do want to leave on a hopeful note. I mean, I think I'm not one to sort of talk about kumbaya. It's all going to be fine. We got some new goals, and it's all going to be good, and net 20, 0, whatever. But I've been working on this idea for 15 years, and people used to look at me like I was from Mars, and now people are interested in the idea. So I think this is a natural evolution in response to the polycrisis, and in many ways, the polycrisis arriving makes the probability of these ideas gaining traction much higher. And again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. The reason to remain hopeful is not because this is going to solve climate change, because it's going to make carbon disappear into cement. This is not that. We need to do all those things. But even if we do all those things well, we're still in deep shit. And the opportunity here is that there is a proven track record of living systems to emerge, to evolve and adapt and respond to changing pressures and to create new prosperity that no one saw in advance. There's evidence of that everywhere. And my belief is that if we align with how life works, we will start doing that in ways we never imagined. And how that affects each of us in our own lives is unknowable. And it's not consistent. It'll be different for Ricardo than it is for me. It'll be different for all of you. But it's a reason to remain hopeful, because just because we can't see what's going to happen doesn't mean something isn't going to happen. And it sounds a little bit airy-fairy, but
But we're okay with that.
yeah, it's real. It's as real. That's as real in physics as this table is.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much. Masterclass in what regenerative economics could be and is. Really appreciate you taking the time.
My
Round of
pleasure.
Applause for John.
Thanks for having me.